Okay, I think we're going to get started for today. Maybe give people a couple more seconds to sit down. Andy Nathan approached me maybe about 6 months ago with the idea of celebrating one of the most established scholars and influential figures in the field of Japanese politics. I want to just start off first by not thanking that person, but thanking Andy for really putting together what is going to be, I think, a remarkable series of events today. And he asked me to launch the day, and I'm very honored to do so, because we're here all to celebrate the career of Jerry Curtis, the Burgess Professor of Political Science at Columbia, the former director of Columbia's Weatherhead East Asian Institute, and the distinguished research fellow at the Tokyo Foundation. As I was preparing my remarks and going through some of the biographical material and the curriculum vitae of Jerry, I was really struck and indeed I would say inspired by his tremendous commitment to build and ensure what is a vital field in the US regarding Japanese politics. He's been doing this in various ways. Since receiving his PhD from Columbia in 1969, he has built a long and distinguished academic career. His myriad publications speak to this. I can't go through all of his books. Some of the top hits include The Logic of Japanese Politics, The Japanese Way of Politics, Electoral Campaigning Japanese Style. He has books written both in Japanese and in English, and several of these books have been translated into other languages, Chinese, Thai, Korean, so the list goes on. But in addition to doing cutting-edge scholarship throughout his life, Jerry has also been a very public intellectual, both here and in Japan. He has been a regular contributor in columns in the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Asahi Shimbun in Japan. And I also learned that he's a frequent guest on Japan's Sunday morning news discussion programs. I now understand why he always comes in so smartly dressed. He has to look good for the TV cameras and always has wonderful suits to do so. But in addition to sort of maintaining a high intellectual profile, I think the other thing that we have to remember is Jerry's been a teacher. And I think he's been a teacher to many of you here. And he has taught and inspired leading scholars in the field of modern Japanese politics, or people who became and who are now leading scholars in the field of Japanese politics. He has also taught and influenced high-level policymakers both here in the United States and in Japan. So it's no surprise that the Japan Studies program at Columbia has actually been heralded by the government of Japan as the most comprehensive and of highest intellectual caliber in the world outside of Japan. So high remarks indeed, yes. As the current Weatherhead, I probably haven't introduced myself, actually. I think I forgot to do this because I jumped straight to Jerry. But my name is Eugenia Lean, and I am the current director of the Weatherhead East Asian Institute. I also teach modern Chinese history here. And as the current director, who's in her second year of her tenure, I want to take note of Jerry's contribution to the Weatherhead, which has been foundational. Recently, I got progressives for my eyesight as I age. And when I read this little item in his biography, I had to take off my glasses and then I put them back on to make sure that I read it correctly. But yes, indeed, Jerry has served as a director at the Weatherhead for a total of 14 years, which shocked me. And he did so over 3 separate terms. And as I said, being the current director, I think that's heroic, and indeed a huge contribution to the Institute. He did, as the director and as a member, as I said, foundational work, quite literally. He worked with Hugh Patrick, who is here, Merit Janoff, who might be here as well, and also Jack Bresnan in securing the Ford Foundation grants, which guaranteed the Institute's first endowment. And he's always been an astute leader at the Weatherhead. He recruited Robert Immerman, who he co-founded the Professional Fellows Program, which is an integral program for us. Roberta Martin was also recruited under his leadership. And he created a national, who worked to create a national award-winning K-12 outreach program. He also brought on board Jack Bresnan, many of whom you know, who created the Pacific Basin Studies program and trained a whole generation of Southeast Asian scholars. So all of this speaks to kind of the institutional contribution that, an institution building that Jerry has engaged in while here at Columbia that only further express his commitment not just to the field of Japan, but indeed to the field of East and Southeast Asia. And indeed, as a benefactor of all his hard work and somebody who's really enjoying serving as the director of the Weatherhead East Asia Institute, I deeply appreciate all those efforts. The contribution to the field only continues today, and I think one of the sort of hallmark acts that he's done in recent months is apparently in a cozy chat with Prime Minister Abe, convinced Prime Minister Abe to contribute not just a endowed chair to Columbia University, but indeed to give chairs to Georgetown and MIT. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall to hear what Jerry did in order to convince Abe to be such a wonderful benefactor to Columbia and to other universities. But again, I think that speaks to Jerry's recognition in the field, his ability to influence, indeed, not just the field, but very powerful and important figures in Japan, so that they will contribute to our knowledge, our deep knowledge of Japan and US relations. For this lifelong commitment to building a reservoir of knowledge about modern Japanese politics in the United States, Jerry was awarded in 2001 the Distinguished Japan Foundation Award at a ceremony in the presence of the Crown Prince and Princess. This was followed by an audience with the Emperor. And in 2004, he was awarded the Order of the Rising Sun, Gold and Silver Star, which, as I understand it, is the highest honor that in Japan that foreigners can hold. And all of this, of course, is much deserved and something that we are here to celebrate today. So it's my great pleasure to welcome everyone and to start today's events. The afternoon events are panels featuring all of whom are participating are former students of Jerry's and will attest to the deep contribution Jerry and his students are making on the field. And I want to just say again that it's my honor to launch these events that will allow us to express our deep gratitude and appreciation for all of Jerry Curtis's accomplishments and to celebrate his career and what will no doubt be a long-lasting legacy on Japanese studies and beyond. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm Frances Rosenbluth, and I teach political science at Yale University, one of Jerry's students from 1989. And everyone here will introduce themselves as we open up this panel. We're kicking off today's discussion to talk about Japan's social and economic policies. And I want to add my own thanks to Jerry for all he has taught us. But the one thing I would say that most characterizes Jerry's teaching, political economy is not so much his thing, but he was happy for those interested in political economy to study that, and he encouraged us to do what we wanted to do. So thank you for that. But even more basic than that was Jerry's insistence, no matter what it was that we studied, that we first ask the question, where's the politics? Because Jerry does not believe that anything happens in Japan without politics behind it, and our job was to find that. There is no economic policy passed. There is no bureaucratic decision made and enforced unless we can identify, unless there's some politics there. And so I hope we will get into some of that in our panel. We are going to open this up for everybody's participation. There's an enormous reservoir of knowledge here in this room. I can see some people in particular who've studied and actually lived many of these issues. But we're going to start off with a few questions to our panelists to get the conversation going and then invite full participation. So Professor Peng Lam, who is at the National University of Singapore, is an expert in Japan's role in Asia. So the question I want to ask you is, now that China has risen and staked its claim to regional dominance, what is the role for Japan in this region?
Thank you, Francis. Before I grab the Chinese bull by its horns, let me pay my homage and tribute to Professor Curtis, like everyone else here in the room. I remember in 1986, I met his teacher, Professor James Morley, and Professor James Morley was then the external examiner at the Political Science Department, National University of Singapore, and I was a senior tutor then. And Professor Morley urged me, he said, if you want to do your PhD, don't go to, I shouldn't mention any other universities. He said that you should study with Gerald Curtis, given your set of interests in Japanese urban politics, political organizations, you should study with Curtis. So in '86, for my PhD program, I applied to only one university. I did not apply to Yale, to Harvard. I only applied to Columbia, and really thank God. I got it, and I've been his student ever since, And remember about a decade ago, then Prime Minister Koizumi launched his election, a snap election, dissolved the lower house, and there were 83 members of parliament, young members of parliament. They were called Koizumi's children. Koizumi's children. So what you see, dear members of the audience here, these are Curtis's student. Okay, Curtis's student, and for the rest of the day, you're going to see a few waves, a few echelons, of Curtis's student. Okay, so from bottom of my heart, thank you very much, Professor Curtis. Francis, to answer that question, the theme of our talk today's symposium is Japan back? From the perspective of Southeast Asia, it's a region of 625 million. Okay, GDP more than US 2 trillion, and by 2060, I'm sure our GDP Southeast Asia will overtake Japan, and the gap between Southeast Asia and China will not be that great. 2060. Yeah, it's from the perspective of Southeast Asia, Japan has never left. It's integral, intrinsic to Southeast Asia. Three things, okay? Japan remains a significant power, a considerable power in Southeast Asia, and beyond. Soft power, because the Chinese and Koreans have been making so much noise about the historical issue, territorial issue. One forget that in Southeast Asia, the country which is most admired and respected is not China, it's not the United States, it's not India, but Japan. You look at the public opinion survey of Pew, the cabinet public opinion conducted every year by the Japanese government, and other surveys. Japan leads all countries in the world, with the exception of China and Korea, considered to be the most admired and leading country in Asia. Okay? Admired for its technology, its job creation in Southeast Asia for decades, for its soft power. When you have a cosplay event in Singapore, thousands of kids will turn out at the convention center. It's amazing, Singaporeans, we are amazed. And my daughter, her mobile phone, her Apple iPhone, the ringtone is a Japanese song. So it's soft power. The economic power is in there. Cumulative investment is light years ahead of China. Okay, China is catching up, and there's a competition between China and Japan, building railroads. Japan lost the bid in Indonesia. The Indonesians will play a balancing game. For the next railroad, they'll probably give it to Japan. Prime Minister Modi had already given the Shinkansen project to Japan, and Japan and China are competing for the Shinkansen track between Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia and Singapore. So Japan is a significant power. Soft power, technology. What about politics and diplomacy? Very, very significant. From the perspective of Southeast Asia, the thing which troubled us a great deal is the Chinese 9 dash lines. It's a self-declared 9 dash lines. The Chinese are not very clear what does the 9 dash lines entail. Is it a claim on the islands, artificial islands, territorial waters, or what? But we in Southeast Asia are very, very concerned. And Japan is assisting the Southeast Asian countries. Vietnam, the Philippines, Indonesia, in capacity building. The training of Coast Guard officers, the gifts of petrol crafts. So that's very, very significant. And Japan had supported the ASEAN community all these years, since its inception in 1967. So this year, from where I come from Singapore, from Southeast Asia, will be officially declared an ASEAN community. Probably second most successful regional organization in the world. And to a very large extent, we have been receiving Japanese economic and diplomatic support for regionalism. And regionalism in Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia is very ASEAN-based. The East Asian Summit, ASEAN +3, and so on and so forth. So Japan had always been very, very supportive of the ASEAN countries, supportive of an ASEAN role in East Asian multilateralism. Because time is short, I'll end within just 1 minute. Just give me 1 minute. So besides playing a very traditional balance of power role in East Asia, in the South China Sea, supporting the US, and Japan may be deploying, the P-1 plane for surveillance, in coordination with the US, to patrol the South China Sea. I don't know, speak to Victor from the National Security Council previously. He may know more about that than I. I've actually written a book, New York and London. It's called Japan's Peace-Building Diplomacy in Asia, looking at 5 case studies, looking at civil wars, and Japan's role in ending civil wars in Southeast Asia and Sri Lanka. Didn't succeed in Sri Lanka, but Japan played a role, diplomatic role. Japan's image, very often it's an economic giant, but it is very reactive diplomatically, politically. But from Southeast Asia's point of view, it is not so. How many countries in the world are involved in peace building in Southeast Asia? Maybe the Norwegians, Finland, Japan, but China cannot play that role because China is not quite trusted in Southeast Asia to play that role. But Japan have been involved in peace building in East Timor, Cambodia, Mindanao in southern Philippines, Sri Lanka. And people may say that Prime Minister Abe is a reactionary, revisionist, and so on, but he is actually very supportive, he and his wife, Akie, very supportive of peace building, consolidation of peace in Myanmar. So he had appointed Sasakawa Yohei from the Nippon Foundation to be the representative of the Japanese government to play a peace-building role, consolidation of peace in Myanmar. And I think prospects are very, very good. I'll end by saying that if you were to go to Myanmar, my article, I'm so sorry, for this shameless self-advertisement. I have an article, because this is actually supposed to be a Professor Curtis, not me, but I have article coming out in the Asian Survey about Japan's relations with Myanmar, whether Myanmar is Japan's last frontier, is coming out. And I had the opportunity to have lunch with then Japanese ambassador Nomata, who is actually a China hand. Just lunch with him, note taker, and a personal sushi chef, So while one tempura, I'll just pick and eat. So I had 2-hour session with him. And he said that, the image is that China is rising. China is rising, Japan is on the decline. Is Japan coming out? But Japan is back in Myanmar in a big way. And I did my fieldwork. I went to Tilawa, a huge industrial park. And Japan is pouring billions and billions and billions of dollars, in the Tilawa industrial park. So I'll end by saying that Japan had never left. It is a significant power in Southeast Asia, soft power, economic power, diplomatic power, and playing a great role in issues of peace. Not an ostrich with its head buried in the sand, but an active contributor to peace. And this had predated Abe's articulation of proactive pacifism and so on. So very highly regarded in Southeast Asia. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, we're going to move to our next panelist, Professor Megumi Naoi. Sorry, we just
Yes,
stole
okay,
your applause. We will applaud everybody at the end.
You guys can clap after this, it's all right. Yeah.
Please store it up.
Yeah.
Professor Megumi Naoi from University of California, San Diego. And I'd like to ask Megumi about a couple of things. The first one is, Japan has had trouble opening some of its markets to foreign trade, and none so much as agriculture. And so now that Abe has been pushing the Trans-Pacific Partnership, I wonder how this is going to work. Is the agricultural lobby really going to go along with this, and is Japan going to join in a meaningful way this bigger free trade zone? The second question I want to ask you is, in today's paper there was an article about Japan's Supreme Court ruling that a woman must take the husband's name. This comes as a shock to people who think that is a symbolic issue and we're way beyond women being able to keep their own name if they want to, regardless of marital status. What is the status of women in Japan? And maybe place that for us a little bit in the demographics of the low fertility.
First, I want to thank you, Professor Curtis, for training me to be a scholar. One of the hardest memories of graduate school is to visit his office to talk about my dissertation proposal. And he would always ask, tell me, Megumi, you have to tell me what I don't know about Japanese politics. So I would polish my proposal, come back to his office, and I say, how about this? You don't know this, right? And he would say, well, I just talked to Nakasone, and that's not what's happening. Well, can you introduce Nakasone to me? No, you can figure it out. So, but the most important thing that he taught me is to challenge the conventional wisdom and never give up, push back if you have to, and get your boots dirty. If he's talking to Nakasone, I can talk to Nakasone's secretary. Maybe they know something that Nakasone doesn't know. So I really want to, and I think it really made my career, because I always now ask, what would Jerry say? Does he know this? This is conventional wisdom. And the answer is no. That's a great sign. That's a project that I should invest my time in. So I want to thank you for all the work. So going back to Francis' question, so TPP is going to work. And I think one of the things that is clear is that all the deal making, which is basically Abe promising the agricultural interests that they will be paid handsomely as an income compensation and all sorts of perks, even before they sign the agreements. So I don't think we see this big shift in agricultural cooperatives sort of anti-TPP campaign. When DPJ was in power, they're all about persuading everybody that this is going to destroy Japan, it's an American conspiracy, don't go into DPP, etc. But once LDP came into power, that all stopped. And you see it everywhere. Agricultural cooperative start negotiating backdoor, as opposed to going out and marching in the Hibiya and trying to persuade all sorts of consumers that they should not really support TPP. So we see this big shift, and that's because basically Abe promised to pay them handsomely. So I don't think this issue that agricultural cooperatives is going to get in the way of executing TPP. Another thing that Abe did that would really help agricultural reform is to basically decentralize agricultural cooperative. They used to have this centralized power. They endorse candidates. All the local branches have to follow the central organization's order. The budget was also then centralized. But basically, Abe's reform, agricultural reform, decentralized all this power to local branches so that they could actually make their own decisions about what candidates to endorse. They could also have their own decisions about whether to support or oppose government policy. So what Abe is doing is, I think it was long overdue, is to really make Japanese agriculture efficient and raise the quality of life of especially the poor people who have to pay a lot. So I say, yes, TPP is going to work. We see a lot more agricultural reform under the LDP government in the future. The second question about the status of women, Supreme Court ruling, etc. in Japan. So the gender problem in Japan is not a human rights problem. I think at this point it's actually a fiscal health problem. And so what it is that no one is paying taxes in Japan. Like 26% of demographics is over the age 65. More adult diapers are selling than the children's diapers, like baby diapers. So who's going to pay the taxes? Who's going to support this 26% of demographics? So what they have to do is that they can't borrow more money. So they really have to think about how to tap into this woman, stay-at-home mothers and housewives who have been benefited from this tax exemption policies that the LDP implemented. So I see what LDP is moving. So Abe's been advocating for like 30% or more women in the leadership positions. They advocate for more daycares, shorter wait lists, and he's also been advocating for cutting down this tax exemption for stay-at-home mothers and housewives so that they have more incentive, financial incentive to go out to work. So all this economic sort of gender problem as a fiscal problem, we see the progress. And I don't think they can afford not to make a progress because of the fiscal health problem that Japan has and the demographic shift. But what Supreme Court ruling tells us is that socially, LDP is not ready. So there's a really strange gap between what they want to do economically and what they can't accept socially. We see this little twist. So I don't know how much progress we can make in terms of the gender equality thing.
Okay, so we're going to open this up, and I think some of you will have some ideas about that. But our next panelist is Professor Takaaki Suzuki from Ohio University. And I would like to ask Taka about Japan's macroeconomic policies under Abe. Does Abenomics have a chance of working? And can Japan compete again? Are we going to get this economy up on its feet again?
Okay, thank you for that question. Before I answer that, I too want to thank Professor Curtis for his many years of guidance, and also, despite the fact that I too suffered immensely during the dissertation proposal phase, as had many others. But one of the wonderful But one of the wonderful things about being a student here is that we not only have an outstanding political science department, but we have a first-rate East Asian Studies department. Professors who are just very well-versed in the region, as well as its application to their particular subfields. And I think no one exemplifies that more than Professor Curtis. So thank you very much for all your insights. In terms of the question about Abenomics, more generally in terms of macroeconomic policy, I think, you know, putting this in a slightly broader context, to what extent, did political reform improve the democratic process and improve the economic policy making of Japan? I think it speaks to that issue. And in terms of the macroeconomic side of it, the two areas that have concerned me greatly is the long period of stagflation that Japan has been going through. It hasn't been steep, but it's been a very long, persistent time period. And also its accompanying budgetary deficits that it's kind of related to. And in my mind, this phenomenon has continued onward for the stagflation and the budget deficit for almost 2 decades. And so the LDP policymakers have not, in my mind, been very successful in addressing these issues. And although I think certainly Abenomics was widely touted, and it did have some very successful initial impact in terms of its very aggressive use of monetary policy, I believe that the two other arrows of Abenomics, and especially the fiscal policy side of it, has been very weak. And I think this is a story that we've seen not just within the Abe administration, but in fact, this is the kind of story that we've seen for an extended period of time since the electoral reforms have been made. Certainly, while the budget deficit in Japan is enormous, and many people like to point out that it's even larger than that of Italy's or Greece's, they face a very different kind of macroeconomic constraint. And so I believe that there is far greater flexibility in terms of fiscal policy. And certainly in terms of tax policies, the consumption tax raise was clearly a contractionary policy. So it not only didn't remain neutral, it remained contractionary. So there are these kinds of problematic aspects that continue to haunt the ability to move out of stagflation, and I would argue move out of Japan's budget deficit as a percentage of its GDP. Because if you're in a deflationary economy, your GDP doesn't really increase. So the ratio is automatically going to go up if you're not confronting that issue as well.
We have about 30 minutes for general conversation now, but I thought before we open it up for comments and questions from the floor, we should let Jerry have a chance to say anything you would like, including fighting back on, yes, whatever you'd like to say, Jerry. Right here. This is.
Well, what I'd like to say first is I'd like to say thank you, everybody in this room who's taken the time to come here today. It's a pretty overwhelming experience for me. I am going to try really hard today not to sort of choke up, but it's not. It isn't easy, really. And I'll have more to say at the end of the session when I'll take a few minutes to share some thoughts with you. Mainly today, this is a really wonderful opportunity for me. I am going to listen to my students, my former students. I'm not going to give grades. I'm just going to feel really proud that my kind of the Curtis children have grown up to be really outstanding scholars, as you've already seen with the presentations you've heard now and you'll hear for the rest of the afternoon. So let me not get into the substantive issues and turn it back to Francis and let you ask your questions. I'll get my chance. I'll get my chance later.
Okay, wonderful. So, if you would like to ask a question, just put your hand up, and we have, I believe, roving mics. Do we have roving mics? Yes. Any comments or questions from the floor? Yes. Yes, and please identify yourself so everybody can know who you are.
Bill Heinrich, State Department. I have a question for Taka Suzuki. I think you're perfectly correct that Abenomics has not really been the kind of initiative that people were hoping at the very beginning, that somehow Japan would change, that it would become more economically dynamic and robust. In fact, it's kind of fallen occasionally back into the doldrums. My question, though, is if that, and most people suggest that that was really why Abe was able to come in and have such high popularity. If it's not working, why is he still popular?
Well,
Taka, I'm sorry, before you start, could I get a show of hands, how many people want to talk? Because if we have a lot of people who want to participate, we might want to collect some, a bundle of questions from the floor before we give a chance for response. And Hugh, I wanted to hear what you had to say about this question too. So, anybody else on this? And maybe Kenya from you, maybe Patricia. All right, so we'll let you think about your questions, and Taka, you go ahead.
Right. So I guess there are two things. One, I'm not against the monetary policy side, and the 2% inflation target was a very good policy. But I think the other two arrows were the ones that are questionable, and that without that, in many respects, you're pushing on a string, and you're not going to be able to achieve the kind of escape from stagflation. Having said that, why is Abe, still popular? His popularity went down a little bit, and then it went back up again. It could, I'm not entirely sure. It could be that there are other valence issues upon which Abe's support resides in, and it could be entirely separate from that of these economic issues. The constitutional reform issue, for example, it's an odd thing because you don't necessarily want him to be the one championing for that, but it's been something that even the Democratic Party had been toying with. He may have gotten some credit for that. Also calling for snap elections after saying I'm not going to, raise consumption tax to 10% may have been able to sway voters' perceptions. But again, you'd have to really do the survey analysis to get at that, I would think.
Can I just follow up and just say, what I was kind of trying to lead toward was, is it Abe who's, really made himself so popular, or is it the fact that he's facing virtually no opposition?
No. That could very well be true. I mean, who are the, other candidates that could stay in power and.
Maybe I could just follow up too and ask the two of you, since Megumi said that the agricultural reform is proceeding apace. That's a key part of one of the arrows, to be able to change the internal structure of how markets operate. And yet, we have perhaps less movement in some other areas. So, Megumi, maybe I could just get you to say something about the tension there.
You mean the reform in other sectors?
The two arrows that are
the
not
fiscal.
doing so well, tell us a little bit about what you think about maybe the variation across sectors, or should we just be a little more patient? Is this going to eventually happen? Will the free trade agreement help push things along on one of those other arrows?
So, so free trade TPP is supposed to push inefficient sectors to either step up or exit, right? So that could happen. But I think when we talk about this reform and whether Abe could do this, I think we tend to dismiss politicians as obstacle to reforms. And we used to say like Japan, politics is third rate and the market is first rate. I don't believe it anymore. I think it's reverse, actually. Politics is okay. Politics is doing the right thing so far. But market, if you talk to American companies who deal with Japan, Japanese companies, what they say is that, it's so hard to deal with them because they don't seem to have enough experience with global market. They don't have human capital to actually oversee foreign branches. And they have to step up. So my sense is that it's not politics that's on their way. I think it's actually market who has to step up.
So Hugh, could I put you on the spot a minute?
I'm Hugh Patrick. I'm Jerry's friend, and I do not take any responsibility here for his views on the economy. though I try to. On Abenomics, I think the problem is that we have a mixture of very immediate short-run policies on deflation and very long-run structural issues on growth. And then the third issue, which is when do you have fiscal consolidation? Fiscal consolidation, I think, follows success on deflation and success on ending deflation and success on achieving good growth. My gut feeling is that deflation has ended, that if prices start to go negative again, we'll see a very strong reaction from the monetary authorities and from the government. So I feel optimistic about that. It's not 2%. It's going to be very hard to get to 2%, but it's not going to be negative. Growth is really a long-run issue, and so we can't really evaluate it now. There are positive things. There's things that are sort of not going as fast as they should, and I find it very hard to make a realistic judgment for something that is still really in the early stages. Structural reform takes a long time. David Weinstein and I were talking to somebody this morning. The first structural reform he mentioned was womenomics, which surprised me, because I was thinking of deregulation, electric power, agriculture, and so forth. So I think we have to sort of keep an open mind about how well the economy is going to do. We talk about it sort of back and forth, close to zero, not doing very well. Remember, the population is decreasing, the labor force is going down, unemployment is very low. Mm-hmm. And if you think that that's a good measure of success, Japan is doing quite well. So what I think we have to do is change our way of thinking about growth and no longer talk about GDP, but GDP per capita or GDP per worker. And you look at that, and Japan has not been doing badly at all over the last 10, 15 years, and it could be doing better, but it's not as if it's a disaster case at all. I could keep on lecturing on you.
Yes. Mike.
Hi, I'm Ko Young Tung, formerly with the World Bank. I am not a legitimate child of Jerry's. I'm an illegitimate adopted one. My question is for Professor Lam. You said that Japan has not gone away from the rest of Asia, and I think we can all say that that's a fair statement, and that Japan is admired in various spheres throughout Southeast Asia. Again, I think indisputable. The question is this: do they see Japan and China as different paradigms of regional power? And do they see one better than the other as in a same scale, or do they see it as totally different paradigms? Do they see China as a good one but not as good as Japan, or do they see this as something that they're suspicious of and worried about? So it's a characteristic of how they view China versus Japan. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Do they share different paradigms? Obviously, different regime types. But I think China and Japan are Siamese twins. You know, Siamese twins joined at the hips, historically, geographically, culturally, economically. So they may not necessarily like each other, but I don't see how they can separate from each other. So whether you like it or not, whether the Chinese like the Japanese or not, the Japanese like the Chinese or not, to me, it's pretty irrelevant. They just have to coexist and live with each other in the 21st century. I spent a great deal of time in China. Last year, I spent a month at the Waijiao Chinese Foreign Affairs University. That's a place where they train their diplomats. No? I travel to China about 7 times a year, different parts of China. My sense is that to most Chinese, Japan is problematic to them, but the greatest challenge to China is actually from within, not across the sea, not across the Eastern Sea. In my sense, that's a problem between the two countries. In China, despite the domestic problems, I feel a sense of overconfidence. I may be wrong on this, overconfidence on the part of Chinese. In the case of Japan, there's a lack of confidence in Japan. But whatever it is, different paradigms, that may be so. But as I've said, I think they are Siamese twins. Whether they like it or not, they have to live with each other. I think there's a slight thaw. In the years ahead, I think there'll be some progress in the trilateral summit. Their economies will be even more intertwined, and they will just have to live with each other. There's no other alternative to that.
Yes.
I'm Samuel Song. This session appears to be concentrated on economic issues. Having said that, Japan's leadership in creating TPP along with the United States is one of the very important organizations. Having said that, for more than 3 decades, Japan rejected U.S. offer for bilateral FTA. Having said that, how can Japan cope with multilateral free trade agreement? That is TPP. Thank you.
Megumi, I think that's for you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. So to rephrase, you're interested in how Japan could play a role in multilateral trade agreements, or?
Japan rejected U.S. offer for bilateral FTA.
Mm-hmm.
Joined the TPP, created the TPP along with the USA.
Mm-hmm.
How Japan can do that?
In other words, wouldn't it be even harder? So given that they didn't
Right.
do this bilateral thing, which should have been fairly simple, how possibly could this more complicated thing work?
Oh, I see. I think the timing was everything. The U.S. was not interested in TPP initially, and when the time that the Japan was looking into this possibility of bilateral trade agreements with the United States, this was a time that the DPJ, excuse me, had a fair shot at winning election. And this rise of two-party competition really slowed down the reform, and which is very counterintuitive, right? We all think that the two-party competition is a good thing because it promotes partisan turnover, etc. But economically and reform-wise, that really stagnated agricultural reform. So what happened is that the U.S., once the U.S. became interested in TPP under Obama administration, then Japan was ripe to actually join this agreement. Then because of the timing, because that the Abe won the election with a comfortable margin with the DPJ. So my sense is that if DPJ comes back in power, this is going to stagnate. The reform is going to stagnate again. So it's all about the timing, when this issue emerged, and how the two-party competition looked like at the time of the salience.
There was a question back here.
Dorothy Salinger, University of California, Irvine. I have two questions. Oh, sorry. I have two questions. One is for Punger Lam. Hello. That is, why is it only Korea among the neighboring countries who still resents Japan's role in the Second World War? Japan did attack and invade many of these other countries, and why are they now friendly to and admiring of Japan when Korea still feels hostile or negatively? And the second question is to Professor Patrick, and that question is, well, not a panel speaker, but the question is about unemployment. And I'm wondering if unemployment is low among formal workers. I thought there was a fair amount of informal workers who may not be counted as part of the unemployment rate, or am I wrong?
I think you want to take the first part,
Okay.
and then Hugh will
Yes.
take the second.
Okay. Yes. I'll try to be very, very brief. A few reasons. No? In the case of Korea, I think was dominated by the Japanese, incorporated, if my memory holds correct, 1910, right? 1910 to 1945. Japanese invasion and occupation of Southeast Asia was a mercifully short 3.5 years. Could you imagine if Japan had occupied Southeast Asia for 35 years? I think the attitudes might have well been quite different. And Japanese occupation, I think, is not homogeneous. If you were to compare Taiwan with South Korea, I think the Taiwanese do have a different opinion about Japanese imperial rule. Second reason is that actually, if you were to talk to some of the indigenous Indonesians and Burmese, some of them are actually quite positive about the Japanese invasion. Because if not for the Japanese, I don't mean to be an apologist, okay, but this is the perception of some of the Indonesian and Burmese friends I've met. They actually believe that if not for the Japanese occupation, Indonesia will still be under the Dutch, and Burma will still be under the British. And the Indonesian army and the Burmese army were actually started by the Japanese. And when the colonial powers came back, you do have an Indonesian army which could fight for independence, and likewise in Burma. So there's a great deal of ambivalence, no? So the attitude of many of the Southeast Asians are quite different from the South Koreans. And 1950s, 60s, 70s, many of the Southeast Asian countries were decolonizing, becoming new states. So it was a conscious decision by many of the governments to normalize relations with Japan. No official mention about reparations, but we did receive a great deal of ODA in lieu of reparations. And Japanese investments were very, very important for nation building. Without Japanese investments, job creation will be a problem. No job creation, there will be political instability for many of these young nascent countries in Southeast Asia. My last point is that Japan consciously adopted a friendship paradigm towards Southeast Asia, a friendship paradigm. 1977, Fukuda Doctrine, and Japan had tried very hard, to adopt a very, very liberal approach towards Southeast Asia. One of the tenets of the, I'll end here, one of the tenets of the Fukuda Doctrine is kokoro to kokoro no furiai, heart-to-heart relationship. No? I actually spoke to the guy who came up with that phrase, Tanino-san. He was eventually the Japanese ambassador to China. He said when he wrote that phrase, he was actually criticized by various people within the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He said, heart-to-heart relationship is really not appropriate for international relations. It's like two high school girls in Tokyo exchanging exchanging notes, between two high school girls in Tokyo, but not within Japan and Southeast Asia. But somehow, it had resonance in Southeast Asia. We appreciated what Fukuda Takeo did. The Fukuda Doctrine is still pretty much the official doctrine, blueprint, Japan's official doctrine towards Southeast Asia. So, my regret for Japanese foreign policy is that there isn't something similar to the Fukuda Doctrine in Japan's relations with South Korea and with China. Why can't they adopt a friendship paradigm? Why can't they adopt a friendship paradigm? So a fundamental difference, to answer your question, why is it different between Japan-Korean relations, Japan and Southeast Asian relations? Very complicated, but I think they should adopt some variation of a friendship paradigm, Fukuda Doctrine, notwithstanding territorial and historical issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Most of the Japanese labor force, around 60%, work in full-time regular jobs. That means that they don't have a particular limit on their contract. They're presumed to work with the company as long as the company is doing well. Something like 38% are called non-regular workers. And Some of them are part-time by choice. Married women work 9 to 3, for example. Many of them work part-time because they can't get a full-time job, but they're employed. The important thing is the statistics are probably pretty accurate. People have jobs. Some of the part-time people everybody would like to have a better job, of course, but the part-time workers, many of them would prefer to have a full-time job if they're working only part-time. It's a complex mixture of people, but they certainly are counted. So it's not an issue of inadequate measurement. It's really a more subtle issue of what kinds of jobs would you like to have, what kinds of opportunities do you have available.
Glenn.
Let me just say, any of the panelists could have answered this just as well and the same as me.
I'm Glenn Fukushima at the Center for American Progress in Washington, D.C., and I'm a student of Jerry's, but not in Columbia. I actually took his course on U.S.-Japan relations, a seminar at Keio University in 1971, even before his book came out. So, in any case, but I credit or blame Jerry for my subsequent career in U.S.-Japan relations. I wanted to offer some thoughts and ask the panelists to respond, and that is the following. I think that if you look at Japan objectively, you look at the demographics, it's very discouraging. Low birth rate, shrinking population, aging population. Fiscal debt, that's a huge problem and not likely to be solved soon. The history issues are continuing, at least with a couple of countries in Asia, if not more. The educational system, the higher education system, I think is in crisis. And I've been doing some teaching at Japanese universities recently. If you think of things like the TOEFL exam, everyone knows that Japan ranks like, second or third from the bottom in the Asian countries in terms of the test of English as a foreign language. What I didn't know until recently was that out of 170 countries, Japan ranks 170th on the speaking part of the TOEFL exam. You can look this up on the ETS website. So, given all of these kind of objective factors, it's hard to be optimistic about Japan, at least in the short term. Also, in my work in Japan for more than 20 years in business, I concluded that what really is important in Japan is continuity, stability, predictability, and not taking risks, and zende shugi, precedentism. So, given all of this, I would like to be optimistic about Japan, and I would want Japan to be competitive, but at least in the short term, I am rather skeptical, and I'd like the panelists to respond. Why should I be optimistic about Japan's ability to compete?
Well, that's quite a challenging question. Maybe I could just take a quick stab, because Megumi said something very provocative that didn't seem to raise an eyebrow out there, which is that competitive politics may be bad for reform. I think that could be true in the short run, but in the long run, surely that is not true. That politics that force politicians really to pay attention to the vast majority of the population as opposed to the well-organized groups is a good thing. How can we get Japan there? And seems to me that the fact that Abe has been able to get as far as he has on TPP suggests that he knows that the Japanese public is made up disproportionately of consumers, taxpayers, voters. The interest groups are all wanting pieces of that, but this is not what's going to move Japan forward. So, as Hugh said, short run, long run, I think short run, we all have lots of reasons to be discouraged. Long run, I do think Japan is moving in the right direction as far as invigorating political competition. I worry a little bit about small parties, actually. I think that slows down what a party can do to come up with encompassing policies that a lot of people want, because as soon as it's going to be costly to a particular group, this, you can find champions of interest groups and they'll form their own little party, and so there's a lot now of stultification that happens as a result. I think that is a structural flaw. So that's, for me, a bit of a shadow. But in the long run, it does seem like Japan is committed to doing better for itself. And that's got to be pro-reform. Yes.
My name is Kevin Cunningham, and I have no connection with Professor Curtis whatsoever, so take no blame for anything I say. I'm an independent lawyer and represent a number of Japanese companies. I heard a speech several years ago by the economic counselor at the U.S. Embassy in Japan who said, sometime in the middle of the 21st century, there will be 2 Japanese left. We've sort of skirted around this a bit, but I think it's something that needs to be faced head on. It's my understanding that the ethnic Japanese who emigrated to Brazil and to Peru, when they tried to come back, were not accepted by Japanese society. It is not many times I hear about Syrian refugees being welcomed by Japan. If you look at the spectrum of politics in some other countries, there is a place for immigration. What are those 2 Japanese in the middle of the 21st century going to do? And how is Japan really back when it hasn't gotten people to be back with? What's happening to immigration, to the structure of Japanese population and acceptance of some people from the outside, since they don't seem to have as yet developed enough policies to have more children who are traditionally Japanese.
Megumi, have you done some polling on the immigration issue?
Right. So, immigration issue. So the LDP actually has been advocating for 10 million migrants, welcoming it. I think they were making progress on that until DPJ rise to power in 2007. So, and then I think this is an unfinished business for Abe, which I think he would take on. But one of the things that he has done, Abe has done so far, is to actually deregulate requirements, visa requirements for tourism from Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, etc. So if you look at the statistics on tourists visiting Japan, it has increased like 30-40% in the past couple of years. If you're going back to Japan regularly, you will notice that the hotel prices has gone up astronomically. And Airbnb business is thriving. And so that's a big, and Chinese tourists like buying lots and lots of stuff at the drugstore. That's a big change. So I think they're making progress toward welcoming more migration. But if you look at the poll, like public opinion polls, those who should benefit the most from immigrants, which is working age woman, right, who has to take care of the kids but also have to take care of their elderly parents, are most likely to oppose immigrants. And it could be, so when I tell this to my students at UCSD, the hypothesis that they usually come back is that, oh, they're worried about husband. Like immigrants, like nannies stealing their husbands. And this is a hypothesis that I would never think about, but it's like, oh, okay.
It happens all the time in Singapore.
Every time I lecture on this, like that's the response. And I don't know, it's that or maybe social disability bias that they
what
feel
about
like
education? What if the education system is, well, Glenn, you mentioned this. You know, there are few chances to move around once you get your job. So the education that you get is supremely important. So you need to start your kids right away. You need your kids to speak beautiful Japanese as soon as they utter their first word.
Oh, you mean Japanese?
Japanese
kids
are worried about foreign nannies who may not be the best in positioning their children for an education system where the stakes are very high because of the rigid labor market.
That's actually a big possibility. Although the English phonetics are now in, right? I think everybody is learning English at the early age, so I don't understand why Filipino nannies or maids would be popular among those highly educated parents who want to expose kids to English.
Maybe they have to come from Oxbridge. Glenn, maybe you've thought about this.
I've had a lot of discussions with Japan on immigration issues, and
I go to Japan about 9 times a year, so I talk with lots of people about immigration issues. And although it's true that the visa restrictions have been greatly relaxed and a lot of Chinese tourists are coming in and buying up lots of stuff, which is good for the economy, I think the fundamental fear of a large, not even large, but a significant inflow of non-Japanese is something that the politicians feel. Some politicians who actually believe that Japan should invite immigrants are concerned that the Japanese public is not ready for it. And there's always concern in Japan about terrorism, about crime, about disease. And so I think there is just a fundamental notion that Japan can be self-sufficient, that Japan can do things on its own and doesn't, and even things like foreign direct investment, although there are steps being made in order to make it easier to have more inward foreign direct investment, the steps are very, very small.
So you see a social
basically,
conservatism holding things back.
Yeah, so as I say, continuity, stability, predictability, and don't take risks. And so I think that more than anything, in addition to all the specific objective factors I mentioned before, is the mindset of insularity and complacency. I don't think that there's a sense of crisis that Japan needs to have a diverse workforce. That in order to deal effectively with international competition, Japan needs to have women in senior positions. I mean, that notion is slowly starting to creep in, and people are talking about it, but it hasn't been translated into action, even with women. And then, I mean, it's basically have more women work in the workplace, have older people work, use robots, and it stops there. The next question is, what about non-Japanese, either at the professional level or at the manual level? And that discussion has not started in a serious way yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have some cause for optimism and some cause for pessimism. I wonder if the panelists have any last word, and then we have to turn over the mic to the next panel. Okay, so we're going to be on time, and thank you all.